after you get done mixing chemicals or applying chemicals, you always want to make sure that you wash your hands. I carry soap, water, and towels in the truck at all times. After every job, we always wash our hands with soap and water and then clean towels before we get back into the truck. Okay. Whenever you're applying pesticides, you want to try not to let them get on your clothes, of course, but that also goes for other people as well. So if you're applying pesticides, you want to ask other people to leave that area. You especially will run into this. Well, of course, always in a house, if somebody's sitting in a room and you're about to treat, you may ask them to go to another room. But a lot of times when you're outside, people don't seem to understand for some reason that it's still just as dangerous to be next to you when you're applying outside, because you could be applying and they might not even be close to you, but that can drift and get on them and get on their clothes, and once it gets on their clothes, it absorbs in, and that could bother them, and they could get an irritation or a rash or something from that direct chemical. So a lot of people are very sensitive to these things, so you have to really be aware of that and those sensitivities. It's better just to tell people it's safer for them if they're not in the area while you're applying the pesticide. Now the label says that. It says do not allow other people to be in the immediate area while you're applying the pesticide. So don't feel bad about asking somebody to leave. There's a nice way of doing it. You can just simply say that it might be better if you are not in this area while I'm applying the pesticide. Or you can explain to them, the label says that you can't be in the same area at the same time while I'm applying the pesticide. So it might be better if you go to another room until I finish treating this room. So just, you don't want to get chemicals on your clothes, and you certainly don't want to get chemicals on other people's clothes either. Okay. All right, let's talk about sensitive areas, okay? Everywhere that you treat is going to have some kind of a sensitive area, but some places you treat have some really excessive sensitive areas. I mean, very, very sensitive. I'll give you some examples. For instance, hospitals, okay? When you're treating at a hospital or around hospitals, you got to be very concerned about the sensitivity that some of those people have to chemicals. Especially if you're going to be treating in an operating room or inside of patients' rooms. You need to make sure that you follow label directions and that you treat these areas, these sensitive areas, the way that they're supposed to be treated. Typically, you can never have somebody in a sensitive area while you're treating it. Like if you're treating a hospital and you're treating each room individually, that you cannot have a person in that room while you're treating it if that's what the label says. So make sure you read those labels and follow. Nursing homes are the same way. Hospitals and nursing homes, they have a lot of people that are elderly and very sensitive to chemicals. The stuff that doesn't bother us at all, that we don't even smell, they might be extremely sensitive to not only the smell, but they might get a rash or some kind of reaction to it. So don't treat some of these areas if you feel like it's going to be a problem. If you have to treat them, make sure you follow the label and that you do it right, okay? Schools and playgrounds, these are sensitive areas too. When it comes to schools, there's rules and laws about treating around schools and playgrounds. So you want to make sure that you read those labels well and that you understand what you can and cannot use. Some pesticides are not allowed to be used in schools and others are, and so you got to make sure that you're using the right stuff. It's also, these are sensitive areas because of the children that are around, so you need to make sure you follow the labels, and the re-entry intervals on those labels are very important in sensitive areas. Another sensitive area, it can be beehives. Beehives, a lot of people don't think about it, but for beekeepers, this is a huge business. And beekeepers can have tens of thousands of dollars in beehives. So it's real important that if you're treating in an area that has beehives, that you make sure that it's not a product that's going to drift and affect these bees. You also want to make sure it's not a product that the bees are going to come into your area and then carry it back and affect them. So as an applicator, even if you're treating a property next to somebody that has bees, it's not even their property, and if those bees get into your pesticide, you can be liable for those bees, and it could be thousands and thousands of dollars. It's big business. A lot of people don't think about it, but these farmers, they have to have bees to pollinate their fields, and so it's a business for beekeepers to take bees and the whole hives, package them up, put them on a truck, and take them to a farmer's field. Then they'll set these beehives up in the farmer's field for an X amount of time, allowing them to pollinate the fields. In return, the beekeepers get to keep the honey. Well, then they'll pack the bees up and they'll move them to another field, or they'll move them back home, and they do this over and over. So make sure that whenever you're applying, especially if it's agriculture product or out in a field, that you make sure that you don't have professional beekeepers in the area that are working that area, because you are responsible, you're financially liable for any damage that you could cause to the hive. It's not unusual that you'll hear people say, that the bees are that we're dying, the bees are going extinct, that we have a problem with bees, and that it's not there. We have plenty of bees still in this area, but we do have to be careful that we don't kill too many of them, because what will happen is that you'll have a beekeeper that comes in an area, and if you have somebody that misuses a product, or they use too much of it, or the wrong thing, and those bees get into that product and they go back, and then it gets on the news, and you'll see a beekeeper that's lost 200,000 bees in his hive, and they show those photos of all those dead bees, and it really upsets people, and they really think, oh, we're losing our bee population and all, and that is true to a certain extent. Now, we still have plenty of bees in Texas, but if we're not careful, those kind of things can cause a devastating effect on the bee population. So that's why beehives are a sensitive area, whether it's a professional beekeeper or even if they're just natural hives out in the wild. You want to try not to kill those off target. If that's not what you're trying to kill, then certainly don't want to kill the bees. Koi ponds, fish, goldfish, these are super sensitive areas. Fish are highly susceptible to pesticides, and so you really got to be careful treating houses that have koi ponds in them, especially if you're doing yard sprays. Make sure that drift doesn't get into that area, into those ponds, because those fish will die if that pesticide gets in the water. Infant rooms are another sensitive area, where the little babies lay, right? So, oh man, if I'm at a house and I'm doing a general pest treatment, and I'm going through a house and I see an infant's room, I'm not just talking about like just a kid room, but I mean like a little baby, just a newborn. There's a crib and a changing table and like a rocking chair in there, it just obviously jumps out as a nursery or an infant's room. Wow, talk about a sensitive area. I mean, little babies that have just been born. And if you've ever seen a baby, when you lay them on the ground, what do? They crawl and they touch everything, and everything they touch and everything they get goes in their mouth, they touch it. Man, this is a super sensitive area, infants' rooms. Typically, I don't even treat them at all. Unless if I have a customer tell me that they got fire ants in the baby's crib, then we're gonna do something about that. But if they're not seeing bugs in that room, I'm not gonna even treat an infant's room. I'm just gonna treat around it, the rooms on both sides. I'll treat outside, I'll treat outside the door. I'll do everything, but I won't treat that room, because I don't wanna take a chance on that baby getting into any pesticide at all. So that's a very sensitive area. food pantries are sensitive. You don't want to take a chance of getting any pesticide in any food products. And these pesticides, most of them that we use, have a residual to them. That means that once you spray it and it dries and the water is evaporated out of it, it leaves behind a residual, the chemical that's there. And it's designed to get on things. In other words, bugs. So that you spray it, the residual's there, a bug comes walking along and it gets some of that pesticide on it, and that's how it works. So this is a very sensitive, food pantries are a very sensitive area when it comes to that. If you spray something and that they're going to touch, they could touch the area that you sprayed, get the pesticide on their fingers, and then they go to pick up something in the pantry that can get onto that food product. It can get onto the wrapper or the container, and then when they go, to take the lid off, now it's all over the outside of it, and every time somebody touches that container, they can get pesticide on them. And now if you go then to touch that food, now it's been contaminated. So food pantries are very, very sensitive. I don't usually treat inside food pantries unless I have to. Then you got to make sure you follow the label. Sometimes you get ants in a food pantry, and so you got to do some treatment in there. But make sure that you're doing it as it's called for, crack and crevice treatment, using baits, doing things, and putting so like for instance, a crack and crevice treatment. When you hear that statement or you read that on a label, that's exactly what it means to treat the cracks and the crevices that you can find. All those little places that bugs like to crawl, like roaches and ants, the little gaps that are, where the edge of the wall and the floor is, and then they put up some molding there. There's little gaps where bugs can go under it or over it or around it, just everywhere where it's not completely sealed. If there's a little hole, and when it comes to little ants, those little tiny ants, just a pinhole, a hole the size of a pinhead is big enough for those guys to go in and out of. So you look for these things, and if you can find where they're coming and going from, then you treat that area. In that case, that hole is so small that you couldn't get any product in it, so you might have to drill a hole and then put something into the wall. So you could do that in a pantry, because now you're treating between the walls, you're not actually treating the pantry. So you want to read the label. You want to treat those cracks and those crevices. In some cases, here's an example of an aerosol. And some of these aerosols will come with a straw so that you can attach it to the sprayer, and you can insert that straw into the cracks and the crevices and spray right into those cracks. That's a very good way of getting control, of getting your product placed into areas that people don't touch. Because if you have a little crack, say you have a shelf and you got a wall in that area right there, and there might be just a little bit of a gap, just a little crack there, and if there's a shelf, and a lot of times the way that those walls work, those shelves sit on something and it butts up against a wall, and so there'll be crumbs and stuff that fall back there, and those bugs and those ants like to go in that area. Well, you can put some chemical down in that crack, and people won't be able to touch it. They can't get into it. And so whether it's a crevice or there's a crack in it or somewhere, wherever the bugs go and they crawl into, you can get that chemical in some places so that people won't get into it. So that's the whole idea of a crack and crevice treatment. So when you're doing a pantry, a food pantry, make sure that's a sensitive area, so make sure that you're treating it in a way that none of that pesticide is going to get into people's food. One more thing about food pantries is you don't want to put bait inside of probably a food pantry if it's in a kitchen, because mice can take pieces of the bait and then carry that and drop it into other things, and so you don't want that bait to get off target and into a food product. So it's not a good idea to use bait in a pantry. It'd be better to use a trap, a glue trap or a snap trap or something of that sort in a food pantry. Air conditioning units are sensitive areas, okay? Now I'm not talking just about the unit itself, the big, like the thing outside that runs, or the thing up in the attic, or it might be in a closet, that unit. Okay, those are sensitive too because they have electrical parts and stuff on them. You got to be very careful treating around electricity that you don't get some of that stuff too wet. But I'm talking specifically right now about treating around air conditioning vents. Okay, so when you're inside of a house, most of the houses have air vents down low, and especially if it's a unit that's inside of a closet, then you're going to have below that unit is an area that sucks air in, and then it blows it up and it sucks it up and through the air conditioner and back into the house. So in those houses that have those intake vents that are down by the ground, you got to be very careful when you're spraying, especially if the air conditioner or the heater is on and it's sucking air in, and you go across, you don't want to spray across those vents and have it suck that pesticide into the system. Think about that. That's a dangerous thought, right? Especially if you're doing a fog or an aerosol, and it's much smaller particles that can be carried through a filter and then back into other rooms. That can be very dangerous. So when you're going down a hall and you see an air conditioner in a closet, and you see those vents that suck air in, don't spray across those vents. Stop. You can spray, stop, go past that vent, spray, but don't let any of that stuff get sucked into the vent. Okay, so air conditioning units, those are sensitive areas. Pet food, pet feeding areas, where they have the dishes, whether it's water or food or whatever, that's a sensitive area. Now think about this, okay? A lot of times a pet dish, especially if they're using a dry dog food, I'm going to use in this case, I know that our dog, if we filled that bowl up full of food, that she would eat that food pretty quick. Now some animals eat it fast, some eat it slow. But the point is that usually when they're eating that food, some of that food might fall out of the bowl, and then when they're done eating, they look around and they eat all that food on the ground too. Dogs don't care if it's in the bowl or on the ground, they're going to eat it. So I've seen some food in a dog bowl land on the ground, and then the dog eat the food off the ground. So if you spray that ground, if you have those people pick up those pet dishes, which is fine, there's no problem with that, but if you have them pick up those pet dishes and you know that that's where those dishes sit, I don't spray right where those dishes sit, those pet dishes sit, especially the food bowl, because some of that food can fall out and those dogs will lick that food up off of that ground, and you don't want them licking that pesticide. Now, of course, it's not as dangerous after it's dried, but there's still a residual there that bugs walk across and it gets on them, and you just don't want animals licking up pesticide. So that's a sensitive area where pet dishes are. Spray around them, spray up to them, spray next to them, but that spot where they feed I don't usually spray on that spot because the food gets there and then they'll eat that. So that's a sensitive area. Try to avoid that if you can. Another sensitive area is fish tanks. Not just, we already talked about koi ponds and how sensitive fish are to how sensitive fish are to pesticides, right? They're extremely sensitive to it. Well, not just koi ponds, not just rivers and lakes and streams, but aquariums in people's houses. Sometimes people can have fish that are worth thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. They can be very expensive and they have a lot of money, and and some people have really nice, big, elaborate fish tanks, or it might be just a standard fish tank, might be a goldfish bowl for that matter, right? But when they're in a house and you're in a house spraying, you got to be very sensitive and be aware of these fish tanks or where these fish are. Because if I'm spraying with this hand sprayer and I have this pumped up too much, or maybe not necessarily too much, but if I just have it pumped up at a high pressure, it's putting out, there might be a mist. There's a small mist that you can't always see, and that mist can kind of roll and go into the air, and when it settles, it'll come back down. And it doesn't take much into a fish tank, because those fish are, you know, trapped in there, and they're going to get all that pesticide through their system, and they're going to die. So you got to be really careful about fish tanks. So here's the thing: don't treat around the fish tank if you can. Now, if you've got a situation where you have to treat by a fish tank, then ask them to cover that tank up. You know, if they don't have a cover to put on it, they can just simply throw a towel or, you know, like a sheet or a tablecloth or something, some plastic over it. It doesn't have to be plastic, even just some cloth, just a towel, as long as it covers it up, the open areas on that filter or on that tank. So if the tank is sealed up, you probably don't have to worry about it much. Just make sure you don't spray it where the air pump is pumping air in, okay? Watch out for that. But just have them cover that tank if you have to treat around it, and that will help. So watch out around fish tanks. It's a very sensitive area. So, you know, just recapping, sensitive areas, you know, hospitals, nursing homes, schools and playgrounds, beehives, koi ponds, infant rooms, food pantries, you know, the air conditioning intake valves areas, and also the, you know, the electrical, any electrical areas, not just air conditioning, but, you know, electrical panels in those places. They're very sensitive. Pet feeding areas and fish tanks and koi ponds and those things. You have to really watch out. These are just some of the sensitive areas. There's a lot more of them, and there again, a lot of that depends on what kind of pesticide that you're using and where you're using it. Are you using it inside or outside? What are the weather conditions? What is on the label? You know, the pesticide makes a big difference. So make sure you read these labels and that you understand them, and that you apply the pesticide in a safe way to protect the people, the pets, and the environment. Equipment. Let's talk about equipment a little bit, okay? First of all, we talked about selecting the proper equipment for the job. That's very important. Making sure that you get the right equipment for the job, that you're trained on it, that you understand how to use it, that you know how to mix the pesticide in it, that you understand all that. But we also, now we want to talk about a little bit more about that. And one thing is maintenance. Maintenance to the equipment is very, very important, okay? Let me show you, for instance, on this sprayer right here. I'm going to put some gloves on. This way I don't have to worry about any residual that might be on the outside of the container getting on me. Okay. All right. Now, one thing that inside of this sprayer here, if there's between this and the hose, this will unscrew right here, okay? Now, inside this handle, there's a filter. And one of the things that you should do to maintain these sprayers is to check this filter. So if I take a wrench and I just loosen this up, you can see when this unscrews. Okay, right inside there is a filter. Now you can see there's some stuff on that filter. You see that? Okay, so now I can take this filter out and then clean it with water. I've got some water here, and I can clean that filter off and then put it back in. And when I do, that it'll keep it from clogging. Okay, so that's one of the things that periodically that you want to do. You want to take the filters out and clean that out. And that, you saw how easy that was to take out. And I'm just gonna simply tighten it up hand tight like that, and that's all it takes. So now there's a connection between here and that fitting. You don't have to undo that one, but it's the last connection between this handle and right here. And so that's where you loosen that up, and there's a filter right inside there. All right, so now, another thing that you can do is, after you get done using this, you can put some water inside of here, and then just a little bit of water is all that it takes when you're done with it, and then swish it around a little bit. What I usually do is I will, now I've already done it on this one, but so what I do is I'll take and I'll put a little bit of water in it, and then I'll hold this and the hose, right? Hang on to it like this, so I can keep it out of the way, and then I can swish this around and swish that water in there, and then I can go and dump this out. And so you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, where are you gonna dump that water that you're cleaning right there? All right, so there's two places that you could do that. One, you could either dump it back into like your spray rig, or two, you can put it in an area that the label allows for it to be. And in this product, like say if I'm using Talstar, which I think was the last thing I used in here. So when I use Talstar, then I get all done, I pour a little water in there, and I can go to the yard, because yard allows you to use it, and I can sprinkle that out over the yard, and then do that, and I'll do that 2 or 3 times, and actually triple rinse this out. And you'll see right away, after you've just done it once or twice, that first time that you clean it out, like Talstar is a white, kind of a milky looking product, and it'll have that look to it. And then after you've rinsed it a couple times, that water will be just as clear as when you poured it in when it's coming out. So you can do that, and I don't even put, I don't put a lot, I just put just a little bit, just enough to swish it around and to get that chemical that's left, in there, just to kind of clean it out. And then that's how I do that. So when it comes to cleaning out your equipment, so taking care of this equipment is very important. Maintenance. So maintenance on this equipment is very important. If you maintain the equipment, it works right and it applies right, and you have a less chance of some kind of a failure where something can go wrong. Whenever you're working on your equipment, whether you're mixing, or you're cleaning it, or whatever you're doing, you always want to keep kids away, okay? So there's a law in Texas that's called an attractive nuisance. In other words, if a kid comes along and sees something and it's dangerous, and the way kids are, it might attract them and they can get hurt by that. Well, you're liable for that. So whatever you do, whenever you're mixing and you're working and whatever equipment that you have going, make sure you keep kids, not just kids, but curious people back, as well as pets too. You don't want anyone, getting hurt. You don't want any pets or any people, or especially any kids getting hurt. So keep them back from the equipment and when you're working.